Hello, Smite gamers. Today we're going to be talking about builds. And I'm not just going to show you what builds are good right now or what items are good right now. I'm going to tell you how to build. I will show you some good items currently, but in general, this video will be a video that you could watch, a year or two from now and still be applicable, because we're not going to just be talking about the best support items or the best Kuzenbo or best Maui build or best Karen build. We will be talking about how to build those characters, and maybe on a new character, what you would think about in terms of building them. In my Kuzenbo guide video, I mentioned some things about how to build towards your strengths versus counter building and whatnot, and that's what this video is going to be. We'll be taking a look at some different gods, and I'll be letting you know my thought process for when I'm deciding what to build on them. So hopefully that will show you what to do in certain situations when you can't pull up a guide or you can't pull up a build on like Smite Guru or Smite Source or something like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. All right, so the first thing that we need to do when we want to talk about building and understanding building as support is we need to break down the different types of support and what they mean. Now, generally in Smite, there are a few different types of support characters. You have your just raw tanks. You have your gods that excel at peeling. You have utility focused gods, and you have just more control based gods. Now, those can be broken down into even more categories, but generally speaking, that's what we're looking at. And to show you some examples of that, you have your just, raw tanks like Sobek or Geb or Ymir or Xingqian. People that are just extremely tanky and can just be in the fight for a long time. Or you have your more utility focused supports that buff your teammates or do something to help your teammates out. Those could be characters like Fafnir or Yamoja, Maui, or even some mages like Iset or Hell or stuff like that. People that can buff or debuff the enemy team or your team to enhance the gaming experience. Now you also have your high peel supports. So the supports that are good against anti-dive comps or that are good against dive comps. These would be called your like anti-dive supports. Those could be gods like Kepri, again, Geb, he's one of those. Yamoja, even Terra. You have lots of options. And then you have your more control based characters like Atlas or Ymir with his wall, or Charon, even Ares, the people that excel in CC and just controlling the fight in your favor and trying to separate the squishies from the tanks or trying to group them all together based on what your team needs. Now, obviously, there are different things you could do in the support role. There's like your high damage supports like Bacchus or Kabrakan or even Cerberus. But generally speaking, those are the typical categories that we'd be looking at when we talk about supporting in Smite. Now, when we talk about building, the first thing you need to do is recognize what category you're going to be doing this game. Now, ideally, that's happening in the picks and bans phase or just the picks phase for my casual gamers out there. You'd be looking at, okay, what does my team have? Does your team have a tanky solo? If so, you probably don't need to play as tanky of a Guardian. You could play a little bit more utility and control based or even a damage focused one. If you have a mage solo, like a Hades or a Vulcan or an Anubis or something like that, something that's just not as tanky but very, very squishy, then you'd want to play a character like Sobek maybe, or someone just super tanky that can both frontline and backline, someone that can do both, like a flex pick, so to speak. Or maybe you just have a very tanky team in general, right? Maybe you have a tanky mid, a tanky solo, and a tanky ADC, or just characters that have lots of self peel. In that situation, you'd probably want to pick maybe a more damage focused support, like a Kabrakan, a Bacchus, maybe even a mage support like Baron Samedi, Aphrodite, something like that, something along those lines, or even an assassin support like Fenrir. Lots of different options. So, like I said, that's the first thing you need to do is what character do I want to play? Now, I myself am more of an aggressive support player, so I play the gods that engage well and create opportunities for the team more than I play the heavy peel gods. I do enjoy my fair share of heavy peel gods like Kepri here and there. However, with the current meta, those engage guardians or guardians that just do some damage are a little bit more valuable at the moment. So that's what we'll spend the most time talking about right now. But I will, again, show you, how to build for everybody. And this, of course, could be applicable to other roles, but as you know, this is a support-oriented channel, so we will only be talking about support here. All right, so we have our support pick. Now we go ahead and we look at the items. What do I buy as soon as I start off the game? Well, you got to use your brain. You know, you got to think. First things first, you got to pick a starter. Generally speaking, you're going to have 3 options. Maybe 4. Not Bumbas, oh my gosh. Maybe 4 if you're a mage support, you know, you have the Lonos mask in there. But again, you need to think about what you and your team needs. What benefits you, what benefits your team in the most situations. You know, are you a character that likes Blink? Yes. Maybe don't go Benevolence. And if you do go Benevolence and you want to go Blink, don't go Compassion. Heroism is a good option. Do they have a lot of heavy CC, like a Loki ult, a Thor ult, something along those lines? Then absolutely consider a Heroism. Heroism is a very good Loki counter if you're a good backline support. However, like we were talking about, if you're a Blink god, you maybe don't want either of those options because you're not going to be playing in your backline too much. You're going to be frontlining and really aggressing and starting fights. If that's the case, then maybe a Sentinel's Gift or a War Flag. You know, both of these are valuable. And when do you go either or? Well, War Flag, you know, if you look at the stats here, it gives you 10 of each prot, health, and MP5. So good mana sustain and good tankiness. And then the passive, what does the passive do? Well, it heals your allies health and mana, and it provides you 8 bonus gold. Perfect. We like gold as support, and we like healing people as support. That's awesome. What else does it do? It gives you 1% movement speed and 2% attack speed for you and all allies within the radius for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 10 stacks. So at 10 stacks or 1.5 waves, you would be at 10% movement speed and 20% attack speed that you're giving to everybody that's around you. So think to yourself for a second, an item that gives you 20% attack speed early on. I wonder if I should go this item if I have an ADC that wants attack speed, which most of them do. If you're an aggressive support that really likes to engage and you have an ADC that needs attack speed, this is a very valuable pickup. When should you prioritize it over the 2 no matter what? Maybe if you have a team that has like 3 ADCs, like a mage ADC mid and an auto attack jungle. If you have teammates that all love attack speed, you're going to get benefits from War Flag. Or maybe you're a slow character that needs movement speed. Then same thing, you'll get benefits from the movement speed side of War Flag. Or maybe you need to be tanky. Maybe you need to be self-sustaining with the Sentinel's Boon. These are things you should be thinking about. When you start off the game, you should look at your team, look at the enemy team, and say, this is what I need. If they have on the enemy team like 4 assassins and a mage, go tanky. Don't go the War Flag. You're not going to want to do damage. Your team's going to be able to do enough damage that they don't have a real tank. Go for the damage route and make sure you and your team don't die. Go for those aura prots and get the Sentinels or the Heroism and or the Compassion. And like I said, if you're a mage, just get Lonos Mask. It's like the best item in the game because it just makes you so goddamn tanky for no reason. Hell yeah. But yeah, that's when you start off the game. That should be your general idea of what you should look for. I need this. My team needs this, so I get this starter. You could spend your entire game, you know, looking at the enemies and saying, I'm a tank, so I need tank items, right? And like, yeah, you want to be tanky as a tank. You want to be tanky as a support. But don't let the general idea of tankiness remove you from the possibilities that these items have in their passives. Again, let's take a look at the Heroism shield. This is a 15% shield based off of your maximum health. So if a Loki ults my ADC who is standing next to me and I'm playing Ymir, for instance, Ymir has the highest base health out of any Guardian. Let's say we have 3,800 health, right? That Huyi or ADC, whoever is getting Loki ulted, is getting a huge health shield. It's basically negating that entire Loki ult that just happened. If they have beads, they can just turn around and fight them. So that's generally speaking what you'd want to look for in those situations. Now, after starter items, what do we want to build after that? Well, I can't speak to the future, but what I can speak for is right now. Generally speaking, we're seeing a lot of supports building a stacking item in this first slot, but you don't have to. right? And when I say stacking item, we're talking about Gauntlet of Thebes or Prophetic Cloak. Now, these items may be removed or changed in future patches, so I won't spend too much time talking about them. But all in all, let's break down the stats and see why these are good options and why we're getting these first. What about them makes it a first item pick? The one thing I want us to look at here first is the cost of the item, $23.50. As support, you're generally speaking going to be behind in gold for a lot of the game, especially early on. $23.50 might seem like a lot, but when you compare it to some other items, it's not that bad. $23.50 is a little bit more than items like Spectral or Midgardian Mail, but no one's getting crit this early in the game. Nobody is attacking that fast this early in the game, so why would you go either of these, right? Or you have a Breastplate of Valor, which immediately gives you 20% cooldown, but do you really need that this early? What is this really giving you other than the protections and mana and the cooldown? How is this helping your team? Cooldowns are nice, but how is this helping your team? And that's when you look at these items, the Prophetic Cloak and the Gauntlet of Thebes. They're fairly cheap for what they do, but then you look at the stats, 25 of each prot, that's nice. Gauntlet of Thebes, 200 health, 15 HP 5, that's nice. Prophetic Cloak gives you health and cooldown, that's very nice. But then the passive, each of these items stack. Every time you get an assist on a minion or a god kill, you get a stack of Thebes. Once it evolves, you gain an aura of 10 of each protections. So what does this do? You're gaining protections, and then once you get max stacks, you gain aura protections as well as those protections. So in reality, using this item as an example, you're getting 45 protections plus the aura of 10. That puts you at 55. And then you're giving 10 to your teammates. That's a good item. You're playing with your team a lot, usually support. So they're going to be getting extra protections just from hitting around you. That's awesome. Why wouldn't we want that? And then we look at Prophetic Cloak. This one's, if it's not clear, this one, instead of waiting for assists, it's more focused on, hey, every time you attack an enemy god, not every time, but once every 8 seconds, you gain a stack of corresponding protections related to the god you hit. So if it was a physical god, you get physical protections. If it was a magical god, you get magical protections. Those protections immediately proc as an aura, and then once you hit max stacks, this item evolves, granting you bonus protections and mitigations. Now do you see the value? Now do you understand why these are good? You might still be wondering, why are these built first every time when other items are bought too, or can be bought and are cheaper? Like, for instance, Stone of Binding, this is built a lot right now and it's cheaper. So why isn't this bought first? Well, the key word that we mentioned for both of these items here is stacking. Stacking in general in Smite means that it takes something over a period of time to evolve or to finish. It needs to be, you need to do something to make the item better, essentially, is what these do. Now, both of these take a decent bit of time to stack, meaning that these are really good items, as you can tell by both of the descriptions, but they take time to get to that power effect, which is why you would get this first or really early on. Now, as a general rule of thumb, not general rule of thumb, but as a something that I tend to notice, I see a lot of players who do something like this, where they will go into this protection item, Sentinel's Gift, and then they'll immediately go into like a Prophetic Cloak and then Thebes. And again, this may change in the future, so don't use these items as a specific example, but they see these two stacking items and this aura prot item, and they're like, I will just stack auras and make my team unstoppable because they're getting so many protections. And that's a very valid train of thought. But what you need to understand is how much time and gold you're investing to get to that result. Remember, these are stacking items. They're going to take a while to get those full effects. And they're pretty expensive. I mentioned earlier that they're pretty cheap, but at the same time, they're still expensive. $23.50 is a decent chunk of change. It's going to take you a while to get to that gold mark. So what you're doing in this situation is you're putting yourself behind and you're delaying your power spikes in order to be tankier later on. Now, if you're playing a late game god, this actually could be quite the tactic because you're not playing for that early game. You're just playing safe for the late game. If you choose to go this route, make sure you and your team are 100% aware of that. Make sure they know you're not playing for early, so you might be a little bit more passive than they want to see. But late game, you're going to be a powerhouse. Now, if you do choose to go this double stacking item route, what I would say is do not do it with Sentinels. Do it with Benevolence. Especially if you're going Heart, or if you plan on going a Heroism. Specifically because Benevolence doesn't inherently give you base protections like both Sentinel's Gift, War Flag, and Lonos Mask do. It does give you magical protections on Compassion, but again, Heroism doesn't give you any. So in order to avoid getting too high on protections or overcapping protections, I would recommend getting it on an item like Benevolence as your starter, where you don't have base protections included. So that's my 2 cents there. But yeah, so that's a good idea as to what you would want to look to build as a starter item on support. You know, a stacking item. Specifically one of these 2 stacking items. And again, to reiterate which one you would choose in that situation is, do you want to be more aggressive early on? Go with Prophetic Cloak. Do you want to be a little bit more passive and play a little bit for more late game plays or mid game plays? Go for the Thebes. Thebes, realistically, it gives you a little bit less overall tankiness than Cloak does, and it doesn't give you the cooldown, but you don't have to play aggressive to get those stacks. You don't have to be constantly fighting to get those stacks. Thebes allows you to stack by just getting farm. Generally speaking, you can stack Thebes a little bit earlier than Prophetic Cloak, but Thebes lets you play a little bit more safe, and Thebes encourages you to play safe, whereas Prophetic Cloak encourages you to play a little bit more aggressive. Now, am I saying go those items as your first item every game? Absolutely not. What we're going to do now is talk about when to not get those items. So let me throw an example out here for you. Both of these items here. Is there an easier way to show you this? I think so. Okay. Both of these items here, Prophetic Cloak and Thebes, give you aura protections and base protections of both physical and magical. Well, what happens if you're against an enemy team that has 4 physicals, specifically like 4 hunters, like a heavy physical damage comp, and they have like a guardian? Not a mage, a guardian specifically. Or you're against 5 physicals, 5 hunters, or 2 hunters, a warrior, an assassin, and then another warrior. Or 5 magicals, 4 mages and a guardian. Would you still want to go one of these items? I mean, maybe if you're against the 4 and the 1. But if you're against heavy physical damage comps or heavy magical damage comps, maybe then you would look to get a different aura item that could help your team out, such as a Sovereignty or a Heartward Amulet. Now, what do these items do? Sovereignty and Heartward do very similar things, but reverse of each other. Sovereignty, and again, these items could change, so I'm not going to be too specific, but Sovereignty gives you health, physical protections, and an aura of physical protections and HP 5, so health per 5 seconds. Whereas Heartward gives you magical protections, an aura of magical protections, and an aura of MP 5, mana per 5 seconds. So if you get where I'm trying to go here, you have an item that strictly gives you physical aura or an item that gives you strictly magical aura. You would look at one of these usually if you're against a team comp like that. Like if I see a team where they have 4 physicals, I'm usually not going to go the stacking item that gives me both prots. I'm probably going to rush this Sovereignty or the item that gives me an immediate rush of physical protections and aura physical protections, especially since it has HP 5. That extra healing early on for you and your entire team is very nice. Especially you'd want to go this item, especially if you're going against a double physical duo lane, a warrior and a hunter, that's included with that 4 physical or 5 physical. Now, are these the only items you could get over Prophetic Cloak and Thebes or those stacking items? Absolutely not. There's definitely different options. I alluded to it earlier, but you have this very cheap kind of damagey item, Stone of Binding, or even Manticore Spikes first. Now, if you get either of these, you do have to note that there are drawbacks, but let's talk about these. Both of these do kind of similar things, and again, these could be changed in the future, so let's just see. Stone of Binding Gives you 35 of each prot and 200 health. Okay, so we're getting prots of each and health. That's very good, especially early on. But the passive is every time we hit an enemy god with a crowd control ability, you place a debuff on them, reducing their protections by 0.8 times your level for 5 seconds. All right, we're getting somewhere here. So this item gives you a bunch of tinkiness, but also gives you a debuff that allows you and your teammates to do more damage, especially the later you are in the game, because it scales off of your level. Whereas Manticore Spikes, this gives you, again, 35 of each protection, 250 health, and a boatload of MP5. Ooh, that's a lot of MP5. And then when you hit an enemy god with a hard crowd control ability, so stuns, silences, knock-up, stuff like that, they drop spikes on the ground that last for 7 seconds. When you or an allied god pick up the spike, blah, 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 blah. Their next ability does bonus magical damage equal to 3% of their own max HP. This effect is doubled if you're the one who picks up the spike. So both of these items grant you bonus damage, or grant your team bonus damage. So when would you want to go with these instead of those options? Well, what did we talk about earlier, right? The different types of support. You would go one of these if your team is really tanky, or your team already has a lot of self-peel and you don't need to do that much. Pick up one of these super early. If you notice, they're noticeably cheaper than Sovereignty, Prophetic Cloak, Thebes, Heartward Amulet. They're not cheaper than Sov and Heartward Amulet, but they're cheaper than Prophetic Cloak and Thebes by 50 gold. They're cheap for a reason. They're meant to be bought by these support characters, or characters that are a little bit down in gold, because they're really good on them. You know, almost every support has multiple forms of crowd control, so they have many different ways to proc the Stone of Binding or the Manticore Spikes. So generally speaking, those are the type of items you'd want to get in the early game. Now, let's go ahead and talk about counter build items, because those can be very confusing. We did already talk about counter build a little bit with these Sovereignty and Heartward, so I will go ahead and leave these in here just to make things a little bit easier. But when we talk about counter building, there's a lot that I want to talk about. Counter building doesn't mean you're countering the enemy's items. It means you're countering the team as a whole. So what they're building, what characters they are, what their characters do, and just general team synergies. Hopefully that makes sense. Sorry, my friend is messaging me and I had to respond on Discord. So, yeah. So that's what counter building means. You're countering the enemy team as a whole. So what are ways we can do that, right? Let's take a look at some current items and see what options we have. First things first, let's talk about anti-heal. One of the most common one of the most common statements that we see in Smite game in the chat box in the left is, we need anti-heal, buy more anti-heal, blah, 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 blah. But what exactly is anti-heal? You know, if you're a newer player, you might have heard that term and be like, what the fuck is he talking about? Anti-heal. What the hell is this shit? Well, anti-heal specifically refers to items or abilities, because abilities have anti-heal on them, that reduce enemies' healing. These items include, but are not limited to, Divine Ruin, Contagion, I cannot find it, Pestilence, and then if you're physical, you have Brawler's Beatstick, you have Toxic Blade, and then you have the Crit Glyph that also does anti-heal. Now, all these items reduce the enemy's healing by a certain amount. Contagion and Pestilence do this in an aura, so these are your aura anti-heals. So as opposed to you having to do something, you just go to them and then they proc them. They also have other passives, but just keep that in your mind for right now. They have aura anti-heal. Whereas items like Divine Ruin or Brawler's Beatstick, if you're physical, or Toxic Blade, they require you to hit the enemy god in a specific way to apply that anti-heal. So each have their own benefits and issues. So if the enemy team has a healer, you could consider anti-heal, but really think about, is the healer doing anything? If they have an Aphrodite or a Shock or something like that, and they're just AFK all game, are you going to need anti-heal? Hell no. They're not helping you. They're not helping the enemy team. They're trolling. They're fucking up. Fuck them. But if they have an Aphrodite or a Hell, or maybe even I'll use Shock again, and they're just dominating the gameplay, right? Like they are impossible to kill. They're constantly bringing their teammates back to full HP or even half HP, which you're noticing you're losing fights that you're, but just barely. You're just barely losing fights. Like, right, if you had one more ability, you'd kill them. That's the healing. That's the healing diff right there. When you're just barely not strong enough to kill people or just barely not strong enough to win fights. That's when you'd want to really consider going an anti-heal item. Now, ideally, you wouldn't get it super early. You'd get it around the 3rd to 6th slot or 4th to 6th slot in your support build, but you want to keep it in mind. Now, when you'd want to get a damage pen item versus these aura items, that's up to your own judgment. If you feel like you're tanky enough at this moment, go with the pen damage item. You know, get some extra damage out there, especially if you're a character that likes damage, like we talked about earlier. But if you're a character that needs to be a little bit more tanky, go with one of the aura items, especially if you're playing a dive support. Go with one of the auras because you're actually applying those auras. If you're playing a super far backline support and your only goal is to peel, don't get one of these auras. You're going to get no value. Now, I did mention some characters have built in anti-heal. Those supports, just to show you, are Sobek, Bacchus, and there's probably some more. But off the top of my head, those are the two that I know has built an anti-heal. Cerberus has an anti-heal passive. I think there's one more that I'm just trolling on because I can't remember. But these two characters have very strong built-in anti-heal. If we look at Bacchus here and go to his abilities, his 3rd ability has 40% healing reduction. Sobek, same thing. His 3rd ability has 40% healing reduction. That's pretty good. If you're playing a support like that, you don't need to really get anti-heal because you already have it. You don't need it that much. And if that's the case, then how can you still counterbuild those healers? Well, as opposed to wasting your goal and getting an anti-heal item, consider the following. Get a cooldown item. It's kind of simple, actually. You know, you already have an ability that does a lot of anti-heal. 40% stacked with whatever your teammates get. That's a lot. That you don't need more than that, honestly. So get an item that'll reduce the cooldown on that shit. Get, like, if you have a lot of prots already, you could even get a fucking Chronos Pendant. You know, this has been in Smite forever. It's not going to change. So you can get a Chronos Pendant. You could get a Pridwin, you know, 20% cooldown reduction and 25 of each prots. Don't get cooldown. You don't need to go anti-heal if you already have anti-heal. It's never a bad thing to do it. It's just you don't need to. You already have it. Why waste the gold on something you already have? If that makes sense. I'm not saying to never get it if you're playing one of those characters. It's just you don't need it as much if you're playing one of those characters. Back to Charon. So that's anti-heal. Now, what else can we do in terms of counter building? Well, there's the aura prots that we were talking about earlier, you know, stacking those aura prots. So we get the stacking item, the thieves or the prophetic look, and then we get the salve and the heart, where do we just stack on stack on stack all those aura prots and make our team very tanky if the enemy team has a very high damage team comp. So if they're playing those 4 assassins or those 4 mages, stack all of those aura protections you can, my friends. Stack all of them. Make your team as tanky as possible. You'll notice a big help there. But what are some other options? Well, we have spectral armor. If your enemy gods have a lot of critical damage, like crit strikes, all that stuff, get a spectral. If you read this passive real quickly, it reduces their bonus damage from physical crit strikes. If you get hit by a critical strike, you gain 10 power and magical, stack it up to 3 times, so less than 6 seconds. So basically, you get hit by a crit, the crit does less damage. And your teammates and you get extra power. Now, this item might be different later on, or there might be a new item that has crit, but generally speaking, if the enemy team has crit, look for items that are good against auto attack. Or if they have a fast attack speed, what are items that are good against fast attack speed? So let's just talk about that real quickly. There are a few items in the game currently that are good against that, but you could get a spectral armor. You could get a Midgardian mail. That slows attack speed if they're attacking you. You could get a relic dagger and then morph it into a bewitched dagger, which creates an aura of attack speed slow. Again, this is an aura attack speed slow. So those are some examples of items that are good against attack speed or attack-based characters. No, they're not using abilities. They're just boop, 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 shooting you with their little bows, usually the hunters. Or there's also assassins like Kali or Arachne and whatnot. Now, generally speaking, crit is really good if you have a lot of health. Crit sucks if you have a lot of defense, because crit inherently is weak against protections, because it's an anti-health build. It's not an anti-protection build. Lately, they have been adding pen to a lot of those items, which kind of negates that fact. However, the test of time still stands that usually speaking, if they're going crit, build more protections of that type, more than you think. Like go into the 300s range. But those are some examples of what you do against crit or auto attacks. Now, what would you do against characters that have heavy ability damage? Well, let's take a look. Immediately, we have this item. Hitting enemies lengthens their cooldowns. All right, so if they're very spammy characters like a Vulcan or a Raw, people that are just spamming you with their abilities, this could be very valuable. You know, it's giving you lots of protections and health, but the passive is, again, when you hit an enemy god with an ability, it lengthens the cooldowns on all of their abilities. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I don't need to speak that out to you. But what other options do we have? You know, we have a Genji's guard. If you get hit with a magical ability, your cooldowns are reduced by 3 seconds. This can only occur once every 30 seconds. So if they hit you with like a mage ult or something like that, you get to just get another ability up for free. What's better than that? You know, this is very good anti-ability. Or maybe you just need some mitigations like Spirit Robe if they have heavy crowd control, or the Prophetic Cloak, or the Oni Hunter Scarp, which gives you a stack of mitigation for every enemy god you're near. This caps at 3, so that would be 9% mitigations. What if they have heavy crowd control, which is something we've already talked about? Well, there's Magi's Cloak. This acts as a free beast. You know, you get hit with a crowd control effect, it doesn't matter. This only counts if it's hard crowd control, so a silence, a stuns, a knock up, stuff like that. Or you have Absolution, cleanses. It gives your team beads after you finish your ult. You know, that's an option. You have many different options. You know, you just have to look and really think about what is the enemy doing that is the most impactful to my team. What do I need the most? If your team is constantly dying to a Kali, don't build anti-ability, build anti-attack speed. But what are some other examples of counter building? Well, the only one I really want to talk about now is anti-shielding, which we actually have an item for now. It's called Erosion. This reduces their shield and makes you faster. There will probably be another item that does this in the future. There's also relics. There's a lot of relics that do this too. There is Sunder. There is Cursed Ankh. There's a lot. Yeah. So those are the basics of counter building. For the next and last section of this video, we're going to talk about how to increase your team's strengths as a support. This should hopefully help you and yourself round out a lot of builds. So these are going to be your last 2 items typically, or even your third slot item. But ideally in these slots, you just look at the passive and see, what does your team need? Does your team need more attack speed? Look for attack speed auras like Shogun's. Is your team struggling with pushing? Get an Emperor's Armor and debuff the towers and buff your towers. Does your team need more power? Are they not doing enough damage? Get a Pythax. Get Aura Power and Lifesteal. Does your team need more healing? Get a Mail and Renewal. Right? What does your team need? You know, there's when you're building in Smite, there's not just counter building you need to consider. It's what does my team need that you need to consider? What can I do to make us more powerful? And that is, in my opinion, the best skill you can have as a player. Is not just knowing how to counter build, but how to build for your team and you as well. What item makes you stronger right now? And that's another topic we could talk about another day. It's just and power spikes in general. But right now, let's say you're a warrior with heavy protections and you want to be a little bit more tanky, but you want to do some damage too. What is an item that immediately, if you don't have, it's going to make you immediately stronger? Clad Shield. Deal bonus damage with more protections. This item literally, every time when you hit an enemy god with an ability, you deal an additional 15 plus 30% of your protections from items and ability as physical damage. So If you hit somebody, if you have a full prop build and you just want a little bit more damage but still want to be tankier, you hit somebody with this, you're doing so much damage. This item immediately makes you stronger. So when you're playing support, you want to look for items like this. But for you and your team, you know, Glad Shield is good on some supports, but what items on support immediately make you and your team stronger? Items like Spirit Robe, which makes it so when you get crowd controlled, you get mitigations and tankiness. Items like Prudwin, whenever you ult, you get a big shield and 20% cooldown reduction, and the shield does damage when it explodes. You know, a last item, Ethereal Staff. When you hit an enemy god, you temporarily steal their health and mana, lowering their mana team fight. That's awesome. Or if you're a healer support, Rod of Asclepius. Give yourself more healing and a cooldown aura. There are so many different options. I can't tell you all of them. I really encourage you all to just go and read all the items and learn what they do, and just use these general ideas that I've mentioned to help yourself become stronger. Because at the end of the day, I can't tell you build this item every game, build this every time game. Because unlike other roles like Hunter, who generally speaking do build the same build every game because mathematically you just do, support is an ever-changing situation. No one support game is ever the same as the last. You have to constantly be thinking as to what do I need this game? What's different this game that wasn't the same last game? What can I buy this game that makes me more powerful? What can I buy this game that makes the enemies weaker? What can I buy this game that makes my team better? I know that's a lot of information to digest, so hopefully some of you find that helpful, insightful. I don't know. Stuff like this I'm very passionate about in Smite, so I could spend hours talking about this. Hopefully you guys find this somewhat enjoyable. If you do, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, please. I'm trying to grow, obviously. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I will upload a new support guide video every Wednesday. And generally speaking, I'll have gameplay on Monday and Friday, but those could be guides as well. But guaranteed a guide video every Wednesday, or like a tier list or something like that. But anyway, that's all for me. Peace out, guys, and have a great rest of your day. Have the days that you all deserve. I love you. Goodbye.